We took the building really just to put recycled paper in, nothing else. That's all we wanted it for. We had no idea of it being used for any other purpose than a recycling centre. And we continued to look at other premises for the sort of nerve centre of Friends of the Earth. The building was a mistake, really. It wasn't what we really wanted. So we got it and then started to realise its possibilities.
I remember all those mornings I came in and there was a new leak in the roof and I had to be up on the roof trying to put some gunge on the felt and keep it going.
Having a building has been hugely important because anyone arriving, as I did, wanting to meet other environmentalists and talk about environmental issues, actually had a door to go to and a door to go in where you didn't seem to be mad or irrelevant, and you could have a serious discussion.
I returned to Birmingham in the late 80s and I just want to get involved in environmental things, and I suppose everybody looked at Greenpeace first, but it just so happened that Friends of the Earth in Birmingham had this building and they used to meet on a Monday night, and I came along on one Monday night, and those of you who know the door downstairs, in those days that door didn't have any windows in it, and it was dark and dingy, and the street lighting around here was horrible in those days. And I remember knocking on the door and I heard a couple of bolts draw back, and then like the door sort of like creaked open and somebody sort of like peered and said, yes. And I said, is this Friends of the Earth? And they said, yes. And I said, is there a meeting? They said, no, come back next week. And then bang, the door was shut. So I thought, okay. So I went back next week and I thought, right, okay, this was an interesting group of people to get involved with. So that was my first experience.
I think it was probably largely driven at the time just by people's particular interests. If somebody turned up and was particularly interested in a particular issue and was happy to lead a campaign on it, then they would probably do it.
Birmingham Friends of the Earth had built a 12-foot model of a sperm whale that they took down to London and paraded through.
On the train?
On the train.
That's right.
With... They paraded it along Grosvenor Street with people dressed in black as mourners behind it. Lynn Roberts on the education side was trying to do things about whole food and nutrition, and then also about health and organic gardening as well as alternative health treatments.
We played a very key part in the Lead Out of Petrol campaign. Birmingham Friends of the Earth sort of led BFoE's campaign. I mean, it was a wider campaign, but we were very instrumental in that.
We were also involved in the city centre and the redevelopment of the city centre. That organisation was called Birmingham for People.
The installation project was based in the warehouse, and the green sites, the project that Richard worked for, were based here. And they had these big vans, and at weekends the vans could do things like be support vehicles for Bicycle Beano or whatever.
Everything was done by pieces of paper, so there was a lot of banging of typewriters. We had to think up what we really wanted to say, because it was all going to go into a newsletter, because it took such a lot of time and effort to produce written communication. The Push Bikes newsletter was delivered by cyclists riding around the streets of Birmingham, pushing it through people's letterboxes to save postage, I remember. A lot of time was spent on recycling envelopes and handwriting people's addresses on the envelope.
We didn't have social media, so you had to make your presence and your ideas known by physically being somewhere.
Every decision was made by a group of 15 people sitting around in a room, and you had to have consensus before you could move on. So it was possible for one person to completely block something that 14 other people thought was a brilliant idea. It didn't happen very often, but it could happen, and it did happen occasionally, and that was incredibly frustrating. On the other hand, it was incredibly empowering because we were all effectively directors of the business and, you know, in law responsible for the accounts and all the rest of it. So it cut both ways.
You never really won a campaign, did you? It would get quite demoralising, but in the end, you know, yeah, the paradigm would shift. People's brains slightly changed because of a campaign you did, and then 10 years later, the legislation's there.
I was taken on to insulate lofts and draft-proof doors and windows. The project was funded to do that for, I think it was just pensioners. We'd have a list of maybe, I don't know, depending on the size of the jobs, 4 jobs in a day perhaps. We had weekly meetings. It was completely flat decision making. You were interviewed by everybody. So this huge growing circle of people. I would say most were probably graduates, interestingly, looking to do something a bit different, or either because they were environmentalists or just they were looking for something to do for a few months. We did also have volunteers helping, and some of those were sort of referred through different agencies. People would sometimes come back to us and say, yeah, my house was noticeably warmer after you insulated it.
The one place in Birmingham you could actually talk about nuclear power. So Bang was looking at both civil nuclear and military nuclear. So this was also the height of the Cold War, and CND was beginning as well, or renewing itself. It was largely educational, and we were educating ourselves. I remember Val Stevens, who led the group, saying, find out as much as you can about nuclear power, you'll hate it. We also used a train for an anti-nuclear demonstration, I remember, against probably Sizewell B and so on, where we could come through the West Midlands and make various stops and pick people up and take them to a demonstration in London.
There was always this question of whether cycling, which was actually a faux campaign in its own right, should be represented in Birmingham through Friends of the Earth or an independent group. And I think generally the feeling was that by being independent, you could attract people into it who, as it were, wouldn't sign up to the wider environmental message.
Because it was a warehouse, we actually had some space. And one of the things we did with the space was to have a cycle workshop, and the idea was that people would sort of pedal past and come in and fix their wheel or their tyre, and also learn those skills, I guess. It was part of the kind of DIY aspect of what we were doing.
Fairly early on, we ran this thing called the Great London Bike Ride, which was a mass participation event, a bit like the London to Brighton, which had got started 2 or 3 years before. But the reason the campaign group ran the Great London Bike Ride was to try and say, look, there are cyclists around.
This is our document called Cycle Friendly Birmingham. And so the text explained what we thought should be done to encourage cyclists. And we also included some maps of what we thought should be the first routes, including cycle routes across the city centre, north, south and east, west, which still don't exist in 2018, I'm afraid. And one out through Cannon Hill Park, following the River Ray, which does now exist, I'm happy to say.
Most people of the Moseley Bog campaign thought we were campaigning to save the public conveniences in the middle of Moseley. They all signed the petitions very willingly, thinking they were saving the public conveniences.
It was a failure of the traditional wildlife trusts, the Warwickshires, Worcestershires, Staffordshires of this world, who just didn't feel there was anything of that level of value worth fighting for within the city. And eventually the people within the city got tired of waiting and decided that a new organisation would have to be set up with a different philosophy, a different kind of approach, where, you know, it would be about people and wildlife, not just putting a railing up around it and leaving it for wildlife.
The warehouse was run as a collective,
yeah.
so that all of us were picking up skills. You know, you had to be on a cleaning rota, you had to be on a cooking rota, so once a month you'd be cooking for 20 or 30 people. We managed the building as a collective, so that we picked up a lot of how to run meetings.
Yeah, we all learnt how to type and to produce graphic material, like burnishing stuff for displays. We did the reception.
Yeah.
We did on the day you did reception, you did the banking. You took the checks to pay in. You did that, didn't you? It was an amazing skills acquisition
Yes.
period, wasn't it? It was great.
Mm-hmm.
And then quite often you ended up in front of a radio microphone or a television camera somewhat unexpectedly, because there was nobody else to do it. There wasn't a designated PR person at that time. We kind of did it all without realising it.
The purpose of the building is to support Friends of the Earth. You know, we're providing facilities for campaigners to use. We're providing a demonstration of what more sustainable patterns of living and working together might look like.